16 scientists struggled for years, but in just 3 minutes, a poor secretary revealed the amazing. Betty's heart raced as she rushed through the sterile halls of the research facility, a place humming with ambition yet thick with despair. Each step echoed her dreams that seemed as distant as the city skyline. She remembered her family, nestled in their small apartment, struggling yet united, her mother's health declining under the weight of bills and medications. Every day, Betty donned her secretary's hat, churning through endless schedules and phone calls, but in her heart, she carried the legacy of her grandmother and inspiration who brewed remedies from nature, each with the scent of love and care. The scientists, with their prestigious degrees and a wealth of knowledge, toiled against the clock. They were fierce and brilliant, yet each failed attempt added to their collective gloom. Betty felt their frustration, their disappointment seeped into her bones. But in the quiet moments, after the chaos faded, she let thoughts of her grandmother's remedies swirl in her mind like a comforting embrace. The simplicity of those teachings began to germinate a seed of hope. One fateful evening, as Debbie organized files under the dim light of her desk lamp, the idea sparked. It was unorthodox, mixing that family wisdom with modern science. Her hands trembled with excitement as she scribbled notes, envisioning a connection no one else had seen. This could change everything, she whispered to herself, each word heavy with determination as she prepared to confront the giants of science. The next morning, she walked into the meeting with her heart pounding. As the scientists exchanged hushed, cynical remarks, Betty's confidence wavered. They barely regarded her, the lowly secretary without a PhD. Yet as she presented her unexpected concept, the air thickened with disbelief. "You expect us to consider this?" one of the lead scientists scoffed, adjusting his glasses, his expression incredulous. Despair threatened to swallow her. Would they always see her as, just, a secretary? But then, something inside her ignited. "With all your diversity in education, sometimes it's what we overlook that holds the solution," she exclaimed, passion spilling into every word. Love and familial wisdom ignited a spark, sending ripples undulating through the room. The tension mounted. Faces shifted uneasily, and murmurs fluttered through the group. They began grappling with the biases, realizing how locked they'd become in their methods. A moment of solidarity flickered, a shared recognition that innovation could come from an unexpected source. Betty's heart quickened. But just as hope started to infiltrate that suffocating darkness, an unforeseen complication rattled them. One of the scientists unearthed evidence that threatened their latest research. The weight of impending failure loomed larger than ever. Betty's world rested on the precipice of exposure or mere dismissal. "Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen." Now let's continue. The atmosphere crackled with uncertainty, as Betty realized this was not just about her idea, but about seeing each other as equals in this fight against despair. Would they embrace the lesson she represented, betraying the barriers set by their titles and egos? The questions lingered heavily as she stood poised between recognition and rejection, her future bound in the threads of community wisdom and resilience. The ticking sound of the clock reverberated through the high-tech walls, concealing the fate of their research and her dreams. The room fell into a heavy silence, each scientist lost in their thoughts. Betty's heart pounded like a drum, the rhythm matching the tension that hung in the air. She scanned their faces, searching for any sign of encouragement. A flicker of interest. A nod of understanding. But all she found were expressions of doubt, skepticism etched in lines on their foreheads. "Maybe we should consider her proposal?" One of the junior researchers finally ventured, hesitantly breaking the stifling quiet. His voice trembled, and he cast a side glance at the lead scientist, fearing retribution for his audacity, the audacity to question the established. "Consider it?" The lead scientist laughed, a harsh sound that reverberated off the sterile walls. "Why would we waste our time on folklore? He dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand, like swatting away an annoying fly. The other scientists exchanged grim looks, their disbelief tangible, but then, just when Betty felt the ground slipping from beneath her, a small voice spoke. It was Dr. Sylvia, known for her unyielding spirit and a heart that often aligned more with compassion than ambition. Actually, folklore often contains grains of truth. We just need to analyze them scientifically. Hope surged through Betty. Dr. Sylvia's words acted like the first raindrop on parched soil. The lead scientist crossed his arms, his skepticism unresolved, but the tension shifted slightly in Betty's favor. "What do you propose, Sylvia?" he asked, voice low and cautious. "We draw parallels," Dr. Sylvia replied, gaining momentum. "We can run tests on the ingredients from Betty's grandmother's remedies, analyze their properties. If there's any merit, we can structure our research around it. It might be unconventional, but isn't that where innovation begins?" Betty could hardly breathe. Was it really happening? She exchanged glances with Dr. Sylvia, gratitude yet disbelief mingling in her heart. The room buzzed with murmurs as the scientists contemplated the idea. "Betty, what ingredients are necessary for your grandmother's formulas?" One of them asked directly, an unexpected glimmer of interest lighting his eyes. She felt a rush of warmth. Maybe this was not about her origins or her job title after all. Maybe they were ready to see beyond labels. With a trembling hand, she pulled out her tattered notebook filled with notes, potions, and childhood memories. As she spoke of dried herbs, ancient oils, and the melodies her grandmother sang while mixing them, the atmosphere began to shift even more. The skeptics leaned in, asking questions, their curiosity ignited. Yet before they could fully engage, the shocking report from the earlier discovery hung like a dark cloud over their budding possibilities. The evidence existed, and it was finite. A rival lab had stumbled onto a method that could easily outpace their efforts. Time was of the essence, and the threat of being overshadowed loomed larger with each passing minute. "Can we divert our focus?" one scientist proposed urgently. "We don't have time to explore this folklore. We need to double down on proving we are ahead of the curve." "No!" Betty exclaimed, her voice steady and fierce. "If we ignore this, we're choosing to remain stuck in the shadows. This could truly be our breakthrough." She felt energized, words pouring out like a dam breaking. "If we collaborate, if we integrate, we might just find what we've been searching for all along." The scientists hesitated, caught in the middle of her passion and their desperation. They exchanged glances, torn between skepticism and intrigue. Just then, the clock chimed loudly, breaking their reverie, a stark reminder of their dwindling time. The moment felt electric with possibilities, but the question remained: would they dare step into the unknown with her and embrace a route away from their rigid confines? As the meeting hung in the balance, Betty's heart raced, hoping against hope for a miracle. What would they decide? Would they take a leap of faith? The clock ticking down mirrored her own pulse, both leading towards an uncertain fate. The clock's chime resonated in Betty's ears, a stark reminder that time was slipping away. A palpable tension surrounded her, a mix of doubt, curiosity, and urgency. Flickering glances exchanged among the scientists told her they were grappling with an unsettling realization: what if there was more to this folklore than they'd ever considered? "Let us break for a moment," the lead scientist finally said, exhaling sharply. But instead of a simple moment of respite, it felt more like a pause before the storm. As the table emptied, Betty found herself alone with Dr. Sylvia. "You did well," Sylvia said softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Sometimes it takes a spark to ignite a blaze." Betty smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over her. "I can't believe they were actually curious," but that spark flickered again as the lead scientist joined them, his face devoid of the earlier laughter. "We have a serious situation. News from the rival lab suggests they might announce something groundbreaking very soon. If we don't produce results by then," he paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "Then we're at risk of being left behind," Dr. Sylvia finished, her voice low but firm. Betty felt the floor shift beneath her. It wasn't just her grandmother's traditions on trial. If they failed, it could jeopardize everything she had worked for, everything she believed in. A desperation gripped her heart. What if we set a timeline? Betty suggested, her voice rising slightly in excitement. We could test a few of the ingredients. See if there's any scientific basis before the announcement. If we can show progress, it might buy us the time we need. The lead scientist regarded her skeptically, but Sylvia's nod gave Betty a rush of hope. We might be able to set up a few quick tests, Sylvia chimed in. We can initiate this as a side project. Just to collect data. Data, he mumbled, his brow furrowing. Fine. But it must be robust, and I want results fast. Time is everything, Betty. Betty felt an electric jolt of determination. It was now or never. I'll prepare everything we need, she promised. Time was ticking, her mind racing as she envisioned late nights in the lab, poring over the remedies that had once seemed like fanciful stories. Memories of her grandmother flooded back, the warmth of the kitchen, the scent of herbs, the way love interwove with concoctions. Let us meet back here in an hour, the lead scientist commanded, rallying the group. I want a plan. We're testing this folklore, but it must yield results. No nonsense. With that, the scientists dispersed. Anxiety tensed the air, but so did a sense of urgency. Betty gathered her thoughts, her notebook gripped tightly in hand as she made her way to the lab. 1 hour. The clock seemed to mock her, each second ticking away with relentless determination. She opened her notebook, tracing her fingers over faded ink, the ancient words trembling on the page like unspoken truths. And then, an idea sparked within her, illuminating her path. What if she bit her lip, her mind racing with possibilities, each one bubbling over with potential? What if this isn't just about the ingredients? The excitement quivered in her fingertips as she calculated her next move. Could her childhood memories hold the key to something more profound, an understanding of the essence behind these remedies? The unity of science and tradition. As she prepared for the next meeting, a surge of courage filled her. She wasn't just a secretary anymore, she was a vital piece in this intricate puzzle. But deep down, another fear nagged at her. What if they discovered that blending science with the heart meant challenging everything they held dear? Would they be ready to trust her? Betty took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. Moments before the meeting, she felt a shift, an undeniable sense that everything hinged on her next words. What would they find in that potent mix of heritage and scientific exploration? Would the answers be more than just formulas on a chart? The heart of her grandmother's legacy awaited, and so did the echoes of their doubt. Betty stood at the front of the lab, the air thick with anticipation. The other scientists trickled in, conversations buzzing like electric currents. She could feel their eyes on her, a myriad of expectations, skepticism, and hope all wrapped up in the same gaze. As her heart raced, she took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts like fragile strands of a spiderweb. Thank you for coming back so quickly. I believe we have a real opportunity here, she began, her voice steady. We've spent time looking at these ingredients scientifically, but what if we approach it from a different angle? A few furrowed brows greeted her question, but also an inch of intrigue flickered in their expressions. What do you mean? One scientist challenged, adjusting his glasses. Betty straightened her posture, determination like armor. We know the folklore. Touching the stories that have been passed down through generations gives us context. If we understand the cultural significance of these remedies, it might guide our tests. Dr. Sylvia stepped closer, her eyes sparkling with recognition. You're suggesting we incorporate qualitative data alongside our quantitative tests. It could give us insight into how these remedies are perceived. Betty nodded, the weight of their task lightening for a brief moment. Exactly. We can conduct interviews with community members who utilize these remedies, gather their experiences, and then match them against our scientific findings. The lead scientist scratched his chin, a flicker of consideration crossing his face. That's ambitious, but it requires coordination, he stated slowly, the words trailing off. Coordination we have. I can send out communication and set up a round of interviews by tomorrow morning, Betty replied, her enthusiasm sweeping up the room. Who would you be interviewing? Someone piped up, skepticism still clinging to their tone. Betty felt the familiar warmth of memories flooding her mind again. I'll reach out to local healers, families using these remedies, and historians who've studied the folklore. They might reveal details we haven't even thought to consider. The lead scientist raised an eyebrow. And if nothing correlates with our scientific tests? Betty's heart sank, but she stifled the doubt rising within her. Then we'll learn. Every failure is a step closer to improvement. We can't dismiss the journey these practices have taken through time, they might hold keys we haven't uncovered yet. A lengthy silence followed, eyes darting amongst each other, uncertainty lingering in the air like fog. Then Dr. Sylvia broke through, her voice authoritative yet warm. I believe Betty is onto something. This is more than a lab experiment, it's about connecting with the community and their stories. One by one, the others began to nod, slowly reaching a consensus. A surge of relief washed over Betty. Finally, they were leaning toward her vision, exploring the world beyond the confines of the lab, but just then, a loud knock echoed through the room. Startled, they turned. The lead scientist approached the door, tension creeping back in as he opened it. Sir, a young intern exclaimed, breathless. You need to see this right now. The rival lab has just announced their breakthrough. Betty felt her pulse quicken, an involuntary gasp escaping her lips. What? What did they find? The intern held up a tablet, the glow of the screen illuminating his anxious face. They've proved the efficacy of a singular herb that they say can cure ailments just like the ones in our folklore. Her heart sank, and doubt flooded back like a raging tide. Would their progress matter if the rival lab had beat them to the punch? Everyone, we need to redirect our focus, the lead scientist ordered, a sense of urgency in his voice. Let us regroup on our plan and find a way to counter this. Betty fought to keep her composure, wrestling with competing emotions. She had just felt solid ground beneath her, but now it seemed to crumble. Could this still work? As the team scrambled around her discussing next steps, Betty found herself staring at the tablet screen. A notion gnawed at her: was this news a reason to doubt, or a catalyst to delve deeper? If they could show the connections between the scientific and the traditional, they still might hold their ground. What if this announcement ignited more than just fear? What if it rekindled a deeper bond between their work and the people they aimed to help? With fresh conviction, she raised her voice above the chaos. We can't let their breakthrough silence our own journey. We have a story to tell that's beyond just one herb. Would the scientists see the power in her words, or would they succumb to the dread of competition? The battle for truth was just beginning, and Betty knew the real fight lay in merging her world with theirs. Betty's plea hung in the air, the lab buzzing with a mix of excitement and doubt. Silence enveloped her as she watched her colleagues ponder her words. The tension felt electric, crackling with potential. They stared at her, their expressions ranging from curious to utterly skeptical. Betty, you're right that we shouldn't give in to fear, Dr. Sylvia said, finally breaking the stillness. But we have to be strategic. If their herb is indeed effective, we need more than just narrative, we need solid data to back up our claims. Exactly. Betty jumped in, her heart racing with renewed hope. But imagine if we go beyond that: interviews, patient stories, proving the efficacy of our folklore remedies against their scientifically validated ones. It's not just about the herb, it's about the larger context. As thoughts began swirling among her colleagues, Betty allowed herself to dream of what could happen. They could paint a bigger picture showcasing the rich tapestry of human experience that surrounded the remedies they were studying. Research wasn't just numbers and equations, it was about lives, stories, and the healing bonds within communities. The entire team, sensing a shift in momentum, began to gather in her corner. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, one scientist admitted. There are merits in traditions that can add depth to our findings. The lead scientist cleared his throat, annoyance etching his features. While discussions are nice, we're on a tight schedule. We need to hit the ground running. Fine, Betty said, feeling the pressure again but maintaining her ground. We can start interviews this week. I can reach out to the local community centers. They might help us understand better. And I can analyze these narratives and see how they can align with or even challenge our scientific data. With the plan forming between them like something fluid and alive, Betty felt a pulse of adrenaline. The room, once stifling, seemed to hum with possibility. They exchanged ideas, their voices rising and blending, igniting renewed excitement, but just as hope swelled, a smaller voice piped up at the back of the room. What if we get skewed results from the community? What if they exaggerate the effects? We all know anecdotal evidence can be misleading. A ripple of unease crossed the room. That's true, Dr. Sylvia conceded, nodding thoughtfully. We need to maintain the integrity of our findings. Then we'll approach this like any science. We gather stories without bias, corroborate them with quantitative data, and see what shakes out, Betty responded, her own confidence building again. If we build our case well, we'll be able to hold our own against the rival lab. Around her, nods turned into fervent murmurs, a wave of determination washing over them. They were in this together, and together they would discover what lay at the intersection of science and tradition. Just as they began to solidify their plans, another knock rang through the lab. This time, it was the intern again, even breathless from another revelation. I think you all need to see this. The rival lab, what now? The lead scientist snapped, a hint of irritation shading his voice. They just released findings from a clinical trial using their herb. It was surprisingly effective, way above expected outcomes, the intern replied, eyes wide. Betty felt the wind leave her sails. Her heart dropped once more. They were up against an escalating battle, and their journey had just gotten a lot more challenging, but as fears crept in, she clung to the slivers of hope, determined to find strength in those stories waiting for them. She gathered her breath, looking at each member of her team. Let us find the truth behind our remedies, regardless of their breakthrough. We owe it to the community and to ourselves. But would they find that truth, or would the rival lab's claims overshadow their efforts? The stakes couldn't be higher, and as they rallied together, the weight of history loomed before them, begging to be uncovered. Betty turned back to her team, trying to shake off the anxiety that threatened to creep in. They couldn't afford to back down now, too much was at stake. The tension in the room pulsated, waiting for someone to take the next step. Okay, she said, her voice firm despite the storm inside her. Let us split into teams for the interviews. Each of us can cover different community centers. The more stories we gather, the better. We'll find the heartbeat of these traditions and see what they reveal compared to the data our rivals have. The lead scientist nodded, his irritation subtly giving way to admiration. I'll work with the statistics. We need solid methods to analyze what we gather. Dr. Sylvia leaned forward, her eyes brightening. I can connect with healthcare providers in the area. They've seen firsthand the effects of these remedies. That perspective will be invaluable. As they started to distribute tasks, enthusiasm replaced their earlier doubts. Betty felt it too, a shared sense of purpose. She visualized their research transforming from numbers on a page to a living collage of individual narratives. Each story would be a thread woven into the larger narrative of health and healing. Are we ready for this? Asked one of her colleagues, uncertainty wavering in her voice. What if we uncover something difficult? Something that really challenges our perspectives? Betty paused, contemplating the question. Then we face it. Knowledge isn't solely about confirming our hypotheses. Sometimes, it's about confronting what we don't understand and using those insights for the future. A round of determined nods followed, a palpable shift in energy replaced anxiety with the thrill of discovery. They moved as a unit, buzzing with a new enthusiasm. As the day faded into evening, Betty and her team rushed to set up contacts, spreadsheets, and schedules. Their laughter filled the lab, a stark contrast to the earlier tension. When it was time to leave, the air was thick with anticipation. Over the next few days, Betty found herself driving through the winding roads of the local community, her heart pounding with excitement. She met diverse families, each one with a story, an elder explaining a remedy his grandmother swore by, a mother sharing how a herbal tea had soothed her sick child's fever. These moments filled her with hope. Every shared story felt like a hidden gem waiting to be discovered, but with each interview, a sliver of unease darted through her thoughts. What if they contradicted the established data? What if some of these narratives were just that tales passed through generations, filled with embellishments? Betty pushed the fears aside, focusing instead on the warmth of each moment. An openness echoed in each person's face, a trust that enveloped her when they shared their stories. As daylight ebbed away on her last day of interviews in the community, Betty received a call from Dr. Sylvia. "You won't believe what we're uncovering here in the lab." Some of the data we gathered. As Betty felt a sharp twist in her stomach, an electrical thrill of suspense. "What is it? What did you find? Come back to the lab, we need you here. It's significant, something we didn't expect." Her heart raced as she drove back, the weight of uncertainty threatening to pull her down. What could they possibly have discovered? Was it something that could shatter their hopes or support their findings? Everything raced through her mind as she parked her car and rushed into the lab. She could feel all eyes on her, brimming with excitement and apprehension. The moment Betty stepped into the room, the atmosphere shifted. Dr. Sylvia opened her mouth, preparing to reveal their remarkable findings. But just as she began, the intern rushed in again, almost out of breath. "You all need to see this now." Betty's heart dropped. Time felt suspended, each second heavy with unspoken weight. What was about to unfold could change everything. As the team gathered closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. But would it lead to victory or devastation? Betty watched as Dr. Sylvia's eyes widened, her hand falling to her side as the intern burst into the lab. The air felt charged, like a live wire waiting for a spark. The room was tense, each member of the team exchanging nervous glances, their collective anticipation thick enough to cut through. "What is it?" Betty managed to ask, her voice strained with curiosity. The intern, panting slightly, held up a tablet. "You have to see this. It just came through. I was looking at the recent uploads from the community interviews and well, take a look." With an urgency that felt both thrilling and frightening, Dr. Sylvia grabbed the tablet and turned it towards the gathered team. As the screen lit up, a series of charts and graphs flickered into view, their vibrant colors drawing gasps. The pulses of data danced across the screen, but what caught Betty's eye were the handwritten notes accompanying the statistics. "These notes," Dr. Sylvia said, pointing excitedly. "They're from community members you all interviewed. They detail the remedies in context to their own family histories. And there is something else." "What is it?" Betty leaned in closer, her heart racing. "Some of the outcomes contradict our initial analysis. There are remarkable success stories here that we didn't expect." Dr. Sylvia paused, eyeing Betty intently. "It seems that these remedies and traditional practices could be more effective than the clinical trials led us to believe." A collective gasp filled the room. Betty's thoughts raced. Could it be that these traditions, dismissed by many, were actually holding the keys to something groundbreaking? A thrill of excitement coursed through her, tinged with disbelief. Still, the questions loomed large. What if these were just outliers? The intern continued. One family provided data showing their herb usage skyrockets recovery times for certain ailments. "It's overwhelming. This could change everything we thought about conventional medicine and healing." As whispers swirled around her, Betty could see faces brightening. But there was a nagging voice in her mind reminding her that uncovering these stories didn't just mean a significant breakthrough, it also came with a responsibility. The stakes were now higher than ever. If they pursued this avenue, they risked challenging established practices, risking their careers in the process. "Are we ready to go public with this?" she asked, weighing the implications. Every eye turned to her, an unspoken agreement forming in the collective silence. "Not just yet," Dr. Sylvia replied cautiously. "We need to confirm these findings. We need deeper analysis." The excitement simmered but didn't fully fade. The uncertainty hung in the air like a dense fog, threatening to swallow the hope. While the thought of uncovering a new understanding of healing was exhilarating, the potential repercussions felt heavy. As the team began discussing their next steps, Betty felt a stirring in her gut. What if pursuing this led them down a path that could shake up not just their careers, but the entire medical field? Feeling the pressure of time and expectation, she took a deep breath, her mind swirling with the gravity of the responsibility ahead. They were close to something monumental, but they couldn't let excitement overshadow their duty to the truth. Betty lifted her chin, resolved. "Let us dig deeper. There's more to reveal here. And we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Just then, a single voice interrupted the buzzing storm of ideas. It was one of the junior researchers, looking pale. "But what if this tradition is based on something dangerous? What if pursuing this leads to misinformation?" The room fell silent again. The glimmer of hope now felt weighed down by uncertainty, ever so fragile. What if they unearthed not just cures, but also hidden dangers? Betty's heart raced again, this time with anxiety. The line between discovery and deceit was razor thin, and they were standing on that precipice. What awaited them if they took the leap? "Let us clarify the truth. We owe it to those families, and to ourselves," she whispered, ready to face the storm ahead, not fully knowing where this new journey would take them. And with that conviction, the room stirred with new energy. But deep inside her, a voice echoed, was this a step toward innovation or a plunge into a paradigm that could alter everything they knew? The answers loomed in front of them, just out of reach. Betty's heart pounded in her chest as the team debated the next steps. Each voice echoed in her mind, creating a cacophony of doubt and hope. Dr. Sylvia, with her usual poise, was attempting to steer the conversation back to focus. "We need a plan. A solid plan. Let us break this down," Dr. Sylvia suggested. "First, we'll contact some of the families who provided this data. We need to gather more details. Then, we should create a board to evaluate the ethical implications." Betty nodded, her thoughts racing. Gathering more data was essential, yet every moment spent in deliberation felt like time wasted. A flicker of urgency ignited within her, and she felt the need to act. "Maybe we could set up a community workshop," Betty proposed, her voice rising with enthusiasm. "We could invite more families to share their stories firsthand. We could gather more information while also respecting their traditions." Dr. Sylvia smiled, appreciation glinting in her eyes. "That's a brilliant idea, Betty. It would give us the context we need and create a broader understanding of those remedies." A wave of relief washed over Betty. They were finally moving forward. Still, the junior researcher's warning lingered at the edges of her mind. She knew the stakes, they could veer off course without careful navigation. As Betty stood with her colleagues, a deep breath shuddered through her. The air was thick with possibility, and for the first time, she felt a pushing urgency to put their findings to the test. The community's stories could be the missing piece, yet there were layers of risks that had to be unraveled. "Okay, let us finalize our approach," Dr. Sylvia announced, rallying the group. "Set a date for the workshop and assign roles. We need to let these families know we value their input." The team rallied around the idea, trading tasks and ideas. Betty felt a swell of pride. They were becoming a cohesive unit, united under a shared mission. Still, a questioning pulse thudded steadily in her ears. Who would they truly be helping in this endeavor? Hours passed in a whirlwind of scheduling calls and drafting outreach emails. When Betty finally stepped outside the lab, the evening sun bathed her in a warm glow. For a moment, She closed her eyes, soaking in the fading light, hoping it would wash away the unease gnawing at her, but as she took a deep breath of the cool air, a shadow passed over her mind. What if they discovered things they could not explain? What if the remedies were based on misunderstandings or cultural beliefs that could lead to real dangers? Betty shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts, but they clung like mist. It was then she noticed a young girl playing in the park nearby, laughter spilling from her lips as she chased after a puppy. The purity of childhood, the trust in simple joys, struck a chord within Betty. Could those community stories reflect that same innocent hope? Betty perked up, determination setting in. They had a duty to discover, to connect. We can make a difference, she murmured to herself, though doubt still loomed. Would their pursuit of truth lead them to places of light or darkness? Returning to the lab, a few whispers echoed in her mind. Every revelation came with its shadows. As she prepped for the community workshop, she couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper they dug, the more uncertain their findings might become. As she glanced around at her teammates, excitement glimmered in their eyes, perhaps too naive to understand the full depth of the task ahead. Could this endeavor lead to real breakthroughs in healing, or would it hail a more dangerous understanding of those remedies? The balance hung precariously, and Betty felt the weight of the moment. What if in their quest for answers, they were unearthing something much more complex than they expected? With a heavy heart, she stepped into the lab's fluorescent light. The path before them shimmered with possibilities, but what awaited them at the end? The days passed swiftly as the team prepared for the community workshop. Each member had their errands to run, but the air was charged with excitement and anxiety. Betty found herself working late, restless energy propelling her through stacks of documents and emails. She wanted to ensure that everything was set. The workshop had to be perfect. It was a crisp Saturday morning when they finally opened the doors to the community center. Streams of sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating the room filled with folding chairs and colorful banners they had made. Betty stood at the front, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of expectations resting on her shoulders. "Okay, here we go," she whispered to herself, glancing at Dr. Sylvia, who offered a reassuring nod. The first families started to arrive, and their stories poured out like honey, thick and sweet. Betty listened intently as each participant shared their experiences. Names of plants and healing rituals buzzed around the room. Some stories were beautiful, steeped in tradition and love, while others rang with desperation and heartache. Each tale added a layer of complexity to their research, remedies that had worked, and those that had not. As the morning wore on, Betty felt her initial enthusiasm morph into something deeper, a sense of responsibility for the families who were trusting them with their narratives. She realized this wasn't just about finding scientific validation, it was about understanding lives woven with hopes and dreams. A woman named Maria stood up, her voice trembling but steady. "I've used this herb for my daughter's asthma since she was young. It's our secret family remedy," she explained, her eyes flickering with memories. "But I'm scared to rely only on it. What you're doing, it could help us." Maria's words hit like arrows. Betty's heart ached. What if their research revealed that these remedies weren't as safe as everyone believed? What if this journey opened more questions than answers? Dr. Sylvia stepped in, asking Maria about the origins of the remedy and its effects. The room listened as Maria delved into her family's history. Each detail painted an intricate picture of culture and resilience that made Betty feel alive. But beneath the storytelling, doubt tugged at Betty again. The fact that science could invalidate the stories left her feeling conflicted. The room radiated warmth and trust, yet she couldn't help but wonder, would they break that trust by revealing truths that destabilized family beliefs? As the last story ended, Betty stepped into the circle and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for sharing. We've learned so much today, but we need your help. How can we ensure that your voices are heard in our research?" Conversations erupted, and ideas flowed. Betty moved from group to group, making mental notes. She felt a spark of hope igniting amidst the fears. They could bridge the gap between science and tradition, but it wouldn't be easy. As the workshop wrapped up, applause and laughter filled the air. Betty felt a rush of gratitude for each storyteller and their courage. Yet, shadows of doubt still loomed. Would they have the strength to advocate for these remedies if the research revealed harmful elements? The complexity of their task settled heavily across her chest. Leaving the community center, Betty caught sight of children playing, and the fear tinged with hope bubbled within her. She was inspired by the idea of weaving traditions with new knowledge. If they could succeed, their office might become a place of connection rather than disconnection, but as they prepared to analyze the stories, a nagging question played at the back of her mind. What if they discovered that the very remedies that had healed generations could also endanger the future they wanted to protect? Desperate for clarity, she rushed back to the lab, ready to dive into the next phase. What awaited them there? As Betty stepped into the lab, a rush of clarity filled her. The energy was palpable, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Each scientist turned towards her, eyes shining with the promise of what was to come. But the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She remembered the stories shared just hours before, the hopes, the traditions, the families who had entrusted her with their narratives. "Okay, everyone," Betty began, her voice steady, echoing off the sterile walls. "We need to analyze what we've gathered, but with the utmost care. This isn't just data, this is lives." A chorus of nods affirmed her statement. Dr. Sylvia sat forward, her expression reflecting both urgency and resolve. "Let us start by categorizing the stories, documenting every detail shared, and how each remedy was claimed to benefit the individuals. We need to compare these with the scientific principles behind our own research." As the team dove into the work, hands rifled through notebooks, fingers tapped away on keyboards. Each story they mapped out became a thread woven into the larger tapestry of the community's heritage. Story by story, detail by detail, hope began to blossom amidst the doubt, but even as they uncovered connections, a lingering sense of trepidation clung to Betty. Each emerging pattern highlighted something powerful about combining traditional knowledge with scientific inquiry, yet fear still gnawed at her. What if they uncovered truths that shattered beliefs? Could they bear the fallout from their discoveries? "Betty!" Dr. Sylvia called, snapping her from her reverie. "Come look at this." Betty approached excitedly, squinting at the screen. Charts bloomed before her eyes, revealing an unexpected trend. These remedies seem to correlate with improved outcomes for certain ailments, but the exact reasons are still unclear. We may need to conduct biological evaluations as a next step. Joy bubbled up inside her, chasing away the heaviness for a moment. "Yes. But let us not rush to conclusions. We owe it to the community to tread carefully. If our findings could have practical implications, we should discuss how those insights could empower them, not threaten." As they continued their work through late nights, a new bond forged among the group. They eagerly shared ideas, confronting dilemmas head-on, questioning their own biases, and the past practices of science. Betty's heart swelled with pride. They were no longer just a team of scientists and a secretary. They were a community, united in a quest for truth. Days turned into weeks, and the final presentations loomed. The morning of the presentation arrived with butterflies dancing in her stomach. Press, community members, and colleagues filtered into the auditorium, filling it with vibrant expectations. As the team gathered on stage, Betty took a deep breath, holding her grandmother's legacy close. She glanced at Dr. Sylvia and her colleagues. They were ready. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," Betty began, her voice ringing out across the room. "Today isn't just about sharing findings, it's about recognizing a tapestry of stories interwoven in the fabric of science and tradition. Our research revealed significant successes linked to traditional remedies, which show promise when compared to clinically proven methods." Gasps echoed as Betty shared the statistics, illuminating the connection between the community's heritage and scientific validation. Each member of the audience leaned closer, hope dawning in their eyes as new possibilities unfolded before them. "What we have discovered is not an indictment of either science or tradition," she added passionately. "It's a reminder of the power each holds when united. Together, We can create a future rooted in both evidence and understanding, empowering communities while respecting their wisdom." As her words hung in the air, Betty caught sight of the faces in the crowd. Tears glistened in the eyes of some, smiles brightened others. The moment felt electric, a moment of realization, of unity. When the presentation concluded, Betty felt exultation rolling over her like waves. Conversations erupted, questions flew. The team fielded inquiries about next steps while the community engaged, their voices weaving in response. Then, as if tracing a line through history, an elder woman stood, her hands trembling as she approached the front. "Thank you for honoring our stories today," she said, her voice breaking. "These remedies gave us strength when everything else seemed lost. Maybe they can do the same for others." Betty's heart swelled. This was the essence of purpose. They were not just a lab or a research team, they were a bridge between generations. Tears brimmed in Betty's eyes, and she nodded in deep understanding. "And we promise to delve further, to seek clarity in those stories while ensuring that your voices are echoed in every decision we make moving forward." As applause erupted, she felt the weight lift. The fears that had clung to her began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but together they were creating something beautiful, something powerful that could ripple through lives for generations to come. In that defining moment, the room pulsed with life. Betty understood then that sometimes, it's the most unexpected voices, the least recognized, that hold the answers to our most profound questions. And in the world of science and traditions, perhaps they had finally unlocked a new beginning. Betty turned to her team. "We're just getting started," she smiled, and they embraced. They knew this journey wasn't over, it was only the beginning of a beautiful, collaborative story unfolding in the heart of the community. Now, the moment has come for you to be part of this community of transformation. You need to subscribe now to never miss exclusive stories that inspire growth, understanding, and connection. Leave a like right now to fuel the algorithm and show you care. Don't wait not even one more second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see how ordinary people can make extraordinary changes. Your support matters, and together, we can spread this message of hope and unity.